This is a talk given by Steve Jobs in 1983 on a cassette tape. It wasn't just tragically hip then. It was what you had. And the title of his talk was, "The Future Isn't What It Used to Be." We always imagine the future, and the future is never what we think it's going to be. Architecture is a great clue to what's going on in the world. This is designed by Mies van der Rohe, 1961, Sears Tower, Chicago. The perfect epitome of modern architecture. It's a grid. It's just cubicles and boxes stacked on one another, perfectly linear, perfectly square, everything bordered, bounded, limited, and stuck up and down. But this is 21st century architecture where there's no first floor and there's no second floor. In fact, the first floor and the second floor might be the same, and they might even look like this, because where architecture is going is even more curvy. So if you look around the world will tell you where people are at. And if you look at the nature of buildings, buildings can tell you a lot about the theological enterprise. So if you're operating on a grid mentality, you might have a problem with people who walk around buildings like this and don't get lost. They can find their way through it, they can find their way around it, and they don't care if it goes up and down like that. So, exactly, I'll move on. So this is a quote from Richard Rohr. "The last experience of God is frequently the greatest obstacle to the next experience of God." Let's just say that you could insert anything after the last experience. The last experience of anything is usually the greatest obstacle to the next experience. But in my mind, it's in the realm of God and theology and church and religion where this becomes a real issue. For most people, what they experience becomes the guiding, determining factor, and they never figure that something can be new and different. It's a sign of great inner insecurity to be hostile to the unfamiliar. And yet we are. All the bloody time. One of my favorite painters, Cy Twombly. In 1950, when the axis of the art world shifted from Europe to America for the first time, Cy Twombly, along with Willem de Kooning and Robert Rauschenberg and a whole bunch of other artists, were at the center of the new movement of art in Western culture. And everybody stayed in New York except for Cy Twombly. And Cy Twombly got on a plane and moved to Sicily, where he lived in obscurity for the rest of his life. And what he did in obscurity was paint. But what also he did was every night he would draw in the dark for 5 or 6 hours with one aim in mind. He said, "I want to draw in the dark so that my lines become less purposeful and I can be open to the intuitivity and the creativity that I have not yet discovered." Firm lines bind in who and what we are and what we do. But Willem de Kooning drew in the dark, so he wouldn't rely on the creativity he had, but he'd be open to the creativity that was to come. All right, so all my favorite painters couldn't paint. This is an ad from the 1970s. Some things just aren't funny anymore. And some ideas have passed their sell-by date. It's not just him. It's not just him. Insert whatever you like. But this idea that a woman's place is beneath the shoe of her man lives mostly in one place today. And usually it has a cross on top of the building. The shadow of the past holds the future hostage. Coming up with new ideas is not the problem. It's getting rid of the old ones. It's like glue or a gum on the bottom of your shoe. You just can't get rid of them. So make sure while you're embracing new ideas that you're letting go of the old things, because we tend to get caught and held hostage by the past. Whatever. Okay, so the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. Church. So, Heidegger, the philosopher, who gave up philosophy for thinking, advised people to take walks to nowhere for the precise purpose of encountering what they didn't expect. What's your circle of influence? If you're reading the same books, watching the same movies, listening to the same music, and hearing the same bloody speakers as everybody else, you need to get a life. And you need to widen your circle of influence. If you want to find what I think it is you're supposed to find, John Wesley said every person should strive to be a voice and not an echo. A voice and not an echo. And you never find your voice by just reiterating what everybody else is doing ad nauseum. It doesn't matter that Mumford & Sons brought back the banjo. I do not want to see them in churches. Picasso said, you can honor tradition by wearing your grandfather's hat or by having grandchildren. And I think that we tend to go for the hat. And so we just put on the same garb, we do the same things. But grandchildren invite a whole new celebration and iteration of life. So for me, the nostalgia arc is problematic for two reasons. One, the world is never what we imagined it was. So, you know, it's like they romanticize. It's like, do you lot watch Downton Abbey? Yeah. What a pile of crap that is. But it's just it's nostalgia for a world that didn't exist in that way. And it propagates a system of exploitation and subjugation and repression and keeps the working man down. So come the revolution. No, anyway, so nostalgia is a very dangerous thing because it always is looked at through a distorted lens. We don't know what the world used to be like in the past. We weren't there. We can only live in the present and in the now. And the obligation is faithfulness to tradition by giving it life. You know, Jesus, you know, I do the Eucharist every Sunday. Those words, do this in remembrance of me. It always becomes, you know, somebody usually starts talking about, well, 2,000 years ago, blah, 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 blah. Exactly. It's not a nostalgic moment. Oh. To remember means to put life into. It's actually a forward-looking thing. We're not meant to think back to what Jesus did. We're supposed to do what Jesus did today, which is live in light and love. So, nostalgia, Smalgia.